low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the March 10th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: oil prices fell in a remarkable reversal after hitting a Sunday night peak, trading at around $85 a barrel after hours in the U.S. Stocks mirrored the about face, with the S&P 500 and Dow rebounding to gains of 0.8% and 0.5% respectively, while the Nasdaq rallied 1.4%. Brothers Tal, Oren, and Alan Alexander were convicted of sex trafficking after a trial in which 11 women testified that they had been lured to exclusive parties and trips, then drugged and assaulted. Nasdaq said it would work with crypto exchange Kraken and issuing companies to develop a plan to offer tokenized stocks on its exchange. The Justice Department and Live Nation settled the government's antitrust lawsuit against the company over the objections of states that vowed to press the case. Archer Aviation, which designs flying taxis, sued Joby, alleging that its rival deceived regulators and investors by concealing extensive ties to Chinese suppliers. First Brand creditors are discussing funding legal claims against former insiders tied to the company's failure. Simon & Schuster named former Amazon.com executive Greg Greeley as its new chief executive officer. N-Scale said it raised $2 billion at a $14.6 billion valuation, a sign that investors continue to see promise in the AI infrastructure startup. Sturm Ruger said Beretta is seeking to gain control of the company through discounted share purchases and outsized governance rights. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. After 10 days of punishing airstrikes by the U.S. and Israel, Iran's leadership is battered but showing signs it is still in control. Frustrating for now the attackers' hopes for the regime's rapid collapse. Trump said he was eyeing a quick end to the Iran war, as some of his advisors privately urged him to look for an exit plan amid spiking oil prices and concerns it could spark a political backlash. Lawrence Summers lost his affiliation with the leading U.S. economics organization, the latest consequence for the former Treasury Secretary and Harvard president, stemming from his ties to Epstein. Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. backed a new drone company, vying to meet demand from the Pentagon and fill a hole left by the administration's ban on new Chinese drones in the U.S. 2 men were charged with trying to carry out an Islamic State-inspired terrorist attack at a protest near New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's residence. Anthropic sued the Trump administration for designating the artificial intelligence company a security threat and trying to cancel its federal contracts. A judge ordered the Department of Homeland Security to justify the detention of a Nashville, Tennessee journalist who was arrested by immigration officials last week. Died Alexander Butterfield, 99, revealed the existence of Nixon's taping system. The picture on today's front page shows a huge crowd waving Iranian flags. And that caption reads, "Iranians filled Inqilab Square in Tehran on Monday to show support for newly appointed Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei." The headline, "Tehran regime gives no indication of yielding amid war's heavy toll. Leadership's ability to rule and fight tests U.S.-Israel goal of bringing it down." By Margarita Stancati and Benoit Falcon. After 10 days of punishing airstrikes by the U.S. and Israel, Iran's leadership is battered, but showing signs it is still in control and able to keep fighting. Senior Iranian political figures, while hunted from the air and limiting their appearances in public, are regularly posting messages that reflect recent developments and Project Unity and Defiance. Iran's military continues to hit high-value targets across a wide front, encompassing Arab Gulf countries, Israel, and beyond, though it is firing fewer missiles than in the first days of the war. On the streets of Iranian cities, security forces maintain a heavy presence, and there has been no significant recurrence of the sorts of protest that shook the regime in January. The inner workings of Iran's leadership are opaque, and it is hard to get a solid read on its status, particularly when the U.S. and Israel aren't putting boots on the ground. But observable evidence of their effectiveness makes clear the U.S. and Israel's hopes for a quick regime collapse aren't yet panning out. The degree of resilience shown by the country's leadership raises the question of how long the U.S. and Israel can sustain their war from above, and at what cost if their enemy doesn't fold. One reason Iran's leaders have been able to withstand the overwhelming military pressure is because they have been planning for a new war since they suffered heavy losses during the 12-day conflict with Israel and the U.S. in June. They were prepared, said Mohsen Zazgara, a founder of Iran's paramilitary Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, now living in exile in the U.S. Even if their military capacity and their buildings are being destroyed, they believe that airstrikes alone can't destroy the regime. There are no signs of serious cracks or institutional breakdown, a person briefed on the military campaign and a foreign diplomat responsible for Iran said. The regime's goal appears to be to hang on as the consequences of the war accumulate and put pressure on President Trump to move on, the diplomat said. Iran's leaders quickly expanded the war into a regional conflict, drawing in Gulf states whose defenses are less robust than Israel's. The fighting is disrupting global trade and travel and has pushed oil prices above $100 a barrel for several hours on Monday, raising the cost of keeping the war going. Iran has fired an average of 45 missiles toward its Persian Gulf neighbors and Israel over the past 3 days, down from 420 on the second day of the war, according to data from the Washington-based Jewish Institute for National Security of America, or JINSA. But the pace has stabilized, and Iran is also firing hundreds of drones at targets including oil facilities, airports, and embassies. The intensity and pattern of the Iranian strikes indicate there is a clear strategy and coordination behind the attacks, some analysts and Arab officials said. The joint U.S.-Israeli war strategy is based on a core assumption that by decapitating Iran's political and military leadership and destroying the physical infrastructure that surrounds them, the regime will be forced into collapse, or at least surrender. U.S. officials have pointed to the elimination of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and other Iranian leaders as a key measure of the war's success. But Iran's state apparatus was built to outlive individual leaders because of layered and overlapping centers of political and military power. The clearest sign of confidence in the regime's survival was the appointment of the late Khamenei's hardline son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the Islamic Republic's new supreme leader. A Revolutionary Guard commander, Salar Abnash, warned parents last week not to let their children take to the streets. If they show sympathy for the enemy, there is a shoot-to-kill order. Oil's wild day sees big surge, reversal. Jump of 31% flipped to after-hours rout. Iran war is clouding investors' outlook. By David Uberti. First there was $100 a barrel oil. Then $110 came and went. Close to midnight Sunday, $120 crude was within reach. But a frenzied 31% run-up in U.S. oil prices after futures markets opened Sunday evaporated, and then some Monday in one of the most stunning reversals of modern trading era. The pullback underscores how the war with Iran is scrambling the outlook for the fuel-hungry economy. After investors sold off stocks across Europe and Asia Monday morning, oil prices gave back most of their gains. Benchmark U.S. futures ended up closing 4.3% higher at $94.77 a barrel. That helped the stock market in the U.S., where companies are more insulated from a global energy shock rally into the close. The gains accelerated after President Trump told CBS News that, "I think the war is very complete, pretty much." He later said, "We could go further, and we're going to go further." In after-hours trading, U.S. oil prices fell to around $85 a barrel, about $35 lower than their Sunday night peak. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Live Nation settles with DOJ, avoiding a breakup for now, by Dave Michaels and Catherine Sayer. The Justice Department and Live Nation Entertainment reached a tentative agreement that would allow the dominant concert promoter to keep ownership of its Ticketmaster subsidiary after years of threats to break up the $25 billion business. The settlement was announced Monday, 1 week into an anti-monopolization trial in which Live Nation's chief, Michael Rapino, was expected to testify. Justice Department lawyers had accused Live Nation of stifling competition by dominating all aspects of the business, including concert promotions, ticketing, venues, artist management, and sponsorships, and harming fans and artists. Live Nation has long argued that it isn't a monopoly and that the market is broader and more competitive than what the federal government claimed. The company has said a breakup wouldn't solve the problems ticket buyers care about, such as prices and fees. The company has taken criticism for decades from concert goers complaining of a Ticketmaster tax, fees of 20% or more that are tacked onto the price of a show. Live Nation acquired Ticketmaster in 2010 during the Obama administration, sparking fears of a monopoly among critics, including some artists. The Justice Department, joined by dozens of state attorneys general, filed its lawsuit in 2024 under the Biden administration, and the suit continued after President Trump retook office last year. Instead of causing a breakup, the settlement would impose terms to make it easier for other promoters to compete for business at amphitheaters and arenas that Live Nation controls, and would restrict the company's ability to use exclusive ticketing contracts at amphitheaters controls, according to the Justice Department. The agreement falls short of an industry overhaul envisioned by some of Live Nation's competitors and critics, who pushed for an investigation of Ticketmaster after a computer system meltdown that hobbled the rollout of Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. Those articles were from the front page. Now for other news within the paper. In the health section, are multiple cancer blood tests ready for prime time? None of the early detection screenings are FDA approved, leading some doctors to urge caution. By Samantha Reddy. A blood test that can tell if you have cancer? A flurry of such tests that look for multiple cancers with a prick are in various stages of development. The one that is furthest along, Gallery, was recently the subject of a provocative Super Bowl ad from the Hims and Hers telehealth company, beaming an experimental technology into millions of households. But just a few weeks later, the test manufacturer, Grail, announced disappointing study results. The test didn't reach statistical significance in later stage cancers, stages 3 and 4. The news comes on the heels of a new law that authorizes Medicare to pay for such tests beginning in 2028 if they are approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. There has been a push for better cancer screening tests. There are currently only 5 available, and they screen for single cancers: breast, prostate, lung, colorectal, and cervical. New technologies are needed, said Dr. William Dahut, Chief Scientific Officer of the American Cancer Society, to come up with a way to screen for every single body part. That would mean all we would be doing was screening tests every day. But are multi-cancer blood tests ready for prime time? The central question isn't whether the test can detect cancer, but whether they can find cancers early enough to reduce deaths. Despite being on the market, none of the so-called multi-cancer early detection tests are currently FDA approved. Rather, some, like Grail's Gallery, are available as laboratory-developed tests if ordered by a healthcare provider. Still, you can get one. Grail says it has sold more than 475,000 Gallery tests since the product launched in 2021. The list price is $949, but many providers have discounts, said Dr. Josh Hoffman, president of the company. The company submitted an application to the FDA in January for use of the test in adults with an elevated risk of cancer. That includes adults over the age of 50 and younger people with additional risk factors. Hoffman says that while the study didn't reduce combined stage 3 and stage 4 cancers compared with the control group, it did show a 20% reduction in stage 4 cancers. Trump aides urge exit ramp from war, by Alexander Ward, Josh Dawsey, and Alex Leary, Washington. President Trump said he was eyeing a quick end to the war in Iran, as some of his advisors privately urged him to look for an exit plan amid spiking oil prices and concerns that a lengthy conflict could spark political backlash. In Florida on Monday, Trump characterized the military mission as mostly having achieved its goals. We're way ahead of schedule, he said, adding he thought it would be over very soon. He didn't provide a clear timeline for ending the Iran operation. When asked about helping the Iranian people who have risen up against the regime, Trump sounded ready for a quick conclusion rather than to continue to push for leadership change. We want a system that can lead to many years of peace, and if we can't have that, we might as well get it over with right now, Trump said. Some Trump administration officials said as long as Tehran continued to attack other countries and Israel still wanted to strike Iranian targets, it was unlikely the U.S. could easily withdraw from the war. Trump on Monday said he was prepared to continue targeting Iran if the country continued blocking the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump won't stop fighting until he can make a satisfactory claim of victory, a senior administration official said. Two charged in attempted New York City terror attack, by James Finelli and Corinne Rami. Two men were charged in federal court Monday with attempting to carry out an Islamic State-inspired terrorist attack at an anti-Islamic protest near New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's residence. The defendants, Emir Bala and Ibrahim Qayyumi, professed their allegiance to the militant group after being arrested at the scene of Saturday's chaotic protest for throwing 2 improvised explosive devices, according to a criminal complaint. Bala told investigators that they had hoped to carry out an attack that was bigger than the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, the complaint said. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of all worlds, the defendant wrote in a statement after his arrest, according to the complaint. I pledge my allegiance to the Islamic State. Die in your rage, ya kifar. Kifar is an Arabic term referring to infidels or non-believers. The 2 men were charged with 5 criminal counts, including attempted provision of material and resources to a designated foreign terrorist group. Islamic State is a designated terrorist organization. From the editorial page, Iran isn't winning this war, but it might if the U.S. stops the bombing due to higher oil prices. Is it time for President Trump to call off the bombing and declare victory in Iran? You'd think so, judging by the panic in Washington as the price of oil spikes. That certainly is the fondest wish of the Ayatollahs, who know they're losing. The reality inside Iran and the region is that the U.S. and Israel continue to make progress. The regime loses more of its military each day, along with the ability to hurt its neighbors. The Israelis estimate 70% to 75% of Iran's missile launchers have been destroyed, and the U.S. has destroyed at least 43 Iranian ships. On Monday, the United Arab Emirates received only 18 drones, down from 126 a day over the past week. We'll soon see if that was a blip or a meaningful decline. Central Command's Admiral Brad Cooper said last week that Iran's missile and drone volumes were down 90% and 83% respectively. Attacks on Iran's internal security institutions are intensifying. At 10 days in, the war can hardly be considered prolonged, and there's nothing gradual about U.S. or Israeli strategy. Instead, there is a race. Can Iran do enough damage to global energy markets with its remaining missiles and drones before it loses them or must come to terms? The regime for now thinks it can outlast the U.S. On Sunday, it chose Mojtaba Khamenei as its new supreme leader, succeeding his father. The younger Mr. Khamenei sends a message of no compromise to Iran's own citizens or Mr. Trump. He is close to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the dominant power inside the country. With even weaker religious credentials than his father, Mr. Khamenei owes his accession to the hereditary principle despised by the 1979 revolution. We're also learning that Russia is aiding Iran's regime in return for its drone production for the war in Ukraine. News reports say Russian intelligence is helping Iran target U.S. forces and radars, with one possible hit at a base in Jordan. That reinforces the point that the U.S. is fighting a larger axis. Iran also sought Chinese anti-ship missiles to sink U.S. carriers. Mr. Trump should tell the public how the wars in Ukraine and Iran are linked. As for the spike in oil prices, the traffic stoppage in the Strait of Hormuz isn't unexpected. It's one reason past presidents were deterred from confronting Iran's nuclear program. The oil spike to above $115 before falling back down below $90 on Monday will hurt consumers in the West. But blocking the Strait of Hormuz is also costly for Iran, which relies on oil exports for its financing. The U.S. in particular has ample oil and gas supplies. Mr. Trump is also right that the disruption is likely to stop. When the war does, and it is a small price to pay for major security advances, we've weathered worse. Adjusted for inflation at $100 a barrel today, Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine sent the price of oil to $143, and in 2008 it hit $217. G7 nations have declined for now to release oil reserves, but that can change if needed. The clamoring for Mr. Trump to end the war will likely increase, including from Republicans who fear gasoline prices going into November's midterms. How long to keep going is a judgment call, but both U.S. and Israeli officials speak about weeks rather than months. Mr. Trump said Monday that the U.S. has already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough. Both allies agree on the need to end the threat from Iran's regime, which can be done by removing it or, second best, its capabilities. That's where differences may emerge. But for now, the regime still has capabilities to destroy. There's no daylight on that. It would make no sense to leave so many loose ends, from missiles and production facilities to nuclear sites at Pickaxe Mountain and the Isfahan tunnels. There's also little reason to leave standing any IRGC or besiege bases. Even if the regime survives the bombing, it's in the U.S. security interest to give Iranians the best chance to retake their country. Mr. Trump doesn't need the regime to fall to call Operation Epic Fury a success. But stopping now, amid some short-term economic discomfort, would be a victory for the mullahs. They can't be allowed to conclude that shutting down oil flows is their passport to survival now and in the future. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A strategic petroleum red herring. Could Democrats be more cynical? Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and others are criticizing President Trump for not tapping the nation's strategic petroleum reserve to tamp down rising gasoline prices. The problem is that Joe Biden's enormous drawdown from the reserve to mitigate a political backlash over inflation has made this harder to do. When wars and global crises disrupt energy markets, the United States has the ability to act, but President Trump and his administration are refusing to do so, Mr. Schumer thundered on Monday. Allow us to distill some relevant facts that he omits. Congress established the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in 1975 after the Arab oil embargo to mitigate supply disruptions in emergencies. Before the Biden presidency, the reserve had been tapped during 3 oil shocks: The first Gulf War in 1991, 17 million barrels. Hurricane Katrina in 2005, 11 million barrels. And the Libya unrest in 2011, 30 million barrels. As energy prices rose with inflation, Mr. Biden in November 2021 announced a release of 50 million barrels. Gasoline prices were not especially high at the time, $3.40 a gallon. But the Biden crowd's goal was to ease public fury over rising costs while they pursued policies to restrict domestic oil and gas production. After Russia invaded Ukraine, the Biden team in March 2022 approved release of another 180 million barrels over 6 months. The scale of this release is unprecedented. The world has never had a release of oil reserves at this 1 million per day rate for this length of time, Mr. Biden declared. He was right, though it didn't do much to curb gasoline prices, which hit $5 a gallon in June 2022. All told, the Biden team drew down 284 million barrels between 2021 and 2023. Mr. Biden could have eased prices by encouraging more domestic production and not snubbing the Saudis, which had excess capacity. He didn't. The rapid drawdown caused damage to the geologic sites around the Gulf Coast where the oil is stored. Democrats slammed the Trump administration for not refilling the reserve, but the storage facilities require extensive repairs before they can be refilled. Last summer's budget bill appropriated $218 million for maintenance and repairs, which weren't a priority for the Biden team. Another rapid drawdown risks more damage. It would also take 2 weeks for oil in storage to enter the U.S. market. The administration's aims by that time to restore traffic that has ground to a halt in the Strait of Hormuz, the cause of surging oil prices, and has said the Navy will escort tankers if necessary. Rising prices are painful, but the U.S. and Israel strikes will prevent Iran from inflicting more havoc and pain down the road. From the opinion pages, how the Iran war ends. The likeliest scenario is that the U.S. largely clears the Gulf, but the regime survives. By Walter Russell Mead. War is the teacher of kings. As President Trump is discovering, it is also a tough grader. So far, air superiority, even supremacy, hasn't prevented Iran from putting massive political and economic pressure on Washington by choking off the Middle East oil flow to the world. There are no signs yet of a popular rebellion capable of toppling the regime, and waves of attacks against Iran's strongholds and assets haven't yet enabled any surviving pragmatist to steer the regime away from its radical approach. As surging energy prices and declining stock markets worldwide drove a vibe shift, many analysts and foreign leaders concluded that Iran's strategies were working and that the U.S. would have to choose between ending the war well short of victory or committing large numbers of ground troops to another Middle East quagmire in the making. The pessimism is likely premature. Vibe shifts are common in war as fear, hope, and rage swirl together. The lesson so far is that Iran's threat to America is both greater than many Iran doves understood and more difficult to address than many Iran hawks hoped. With missile and drone attacks, Tehran has succeeded in at least temporarily blocking nearly all traffic in and out of the Strait of Hormuz and has forced some Gulf countries to curtail oil and gas production. If the waterway remains largely closed, we can expect what analysts call the greatest energy shock since the 1970s. The Gulf is more than fossil fuels. As the Gulf Cooperation Council countries have sought to reduce their dependence on oil and gas exports, they have built up energy-intensive industries like data centers and aluminum smelters. These are vulnerable to Iranian missile and drone attacks. Additionally, exports of helium, vital for South Korean semiconductor production, have been blocked. The Gulf is also an important center for fertilizer production. The White House and Congress can expect calls from frantic farmers as costs shoot up and poor countries may be priced out of the fertilizer market. Since World War II, U.S. presidents of both parties believe that preventing any hostile country from blackmailing the rest of the world by blocking exports from the Gulf was of vital national interest. This reality, not Israeli lobbying, has been the driving force behind American Middle East policy. The war shocks rattling global financial markets show how important this factor remains. If Iran pressures the U.S. to end the war before it can break the blockade and cripple Tehran's ability to impose new blockades down the road, the mullahs will hold an acknowledged veto power over the ability of their Gulf neighbors to trade with the world. The Iranian regime could then threaten a global economic crisis at will and would build up the weapons and war chest that will make its position unassailable. The current war holds another lesson. Tehran's nuclear weapons program is an important element of the threat to the region, but nukes are only one of the weapons Iran could use to block trade there. Already, Iran's missiles and drones have blocked the Gulf, at least temporarily. This capability would only grow in time as the mullahs replenish their arsenals. Unless checked, Iran could soon deter attacks on its nuclear program by threatening to close the Gulf. The war looks set to end in one of three ways. One would be a clear and damaging American defeat. If a mix of global pressure and domestic opposition forces the Trump administration to end the conflict before full trade is restored through the Gulf, a battered Iran will emerge having demonstrated its ability to close the Gulf against everything the world's greatest military power can throw at it. America's power and prestige, not to mention Mr. Trump's, would struggle to recover from such a fiasco. Alternatively, the Americans could reopen the Gulf as a new Iranian government more focused on developing the country than on dominating its neighbors emerges. This would be a major victory for the Trump administration. Most likely is an in-between scenario in which the U.S. largely clears the Gulf, but the current regime survives. Operation Epic Fury would, in that case, be remembered as the mother of all lawnmowers, solving nothing fundamental, but preserving a fragile balance of power in a vital part of the world. Mr. Trump was never much of a student, but the School of War has set him an exam that he can't afford to fail. Let us hope he manages to pass. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Can the Iranian regime survive? Can the Islamic Republic of Iran survive the waves of devastating attacks being launched around the clock by the Israeli and Americans? Nobody knows. By Walter Russell Mead. Unlike Saddam Hussein's Iraq or Muammar Gaddafi's Libya, Iran has a long record of success. On October 6, 2023, it appeared to be achieving its long-term goal of a durable hegemony in the Middle East. Its proxies and allies dominated Iraq. Bashar al-Assad seemed firmly in power in Syria. Hezbollah held Lebanon's destiny in its hands. The Houthis had enough firepower to choke off navigation through the Red Sea, depriving Egypt of badly needed Suez Canal revenue and imposing cost on shipping and trade. The mullahs were good at building alliances. By supplying drones for Russia's war on Ukraine, Iran gained close friends in Moscow. Relations with China prospered. Venezuela stood ready to assist with smuggling and gun running to support Iranian designs against the U.S. and its allies. Most improbable, the Shiite theocracy of Iran had built strong relations with radical Sunni Islamists. By taking advantage of their common desire to destroy Israel, the mullahs had become partners and patrons of Hamas, the Palestinian offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar, ideologically aligned with the Brotherhood and diplomatically at odds with what it saw as an overbearing and threatening Saudi Arabia, was cooperating. Every piece of this imposing structure was tenaciously and patiently constructed in the face of opposition from the Americans, Israelis, and Saudis. Alternatively, bamboozling, outmaneuvering, intimidating, and sometimes simply murdering their opponents, the Iranian mullahs built a regional power network on the twin foundations of unbending rejection of Israel's existence and unyielding opposition to American power. The architects of this power system may not command our love, but they deserve our wary respect. The perceptions of Western state bureaucracies, think tanks, and pundits still reflect reluctant recognition of a quarter century of Iranian advance under the theocratic regime. Yet, if the rise to peak Iranian power in 2023 was laborious, the descent from it has been swift. Besotted with success, the mullahs overreached, and since October 7th, they have watched one stronghold after another fall to Israeli counterattacks, boosted by American support. Now the surviving mullahs and officers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps cower in bunkers, afraid of their own cell phones. The coalition against Iran, including Germany, Canada, and even Qatar, reflects a high degree of international consensus that the mullahs belong back in the mosques. The question that world leaders now need to examine is whether Iran's war strategies reflect the subtle and effective blend of insight and ruthlessness that lifted the country to the heights of power, or the folly and delusion that brought it to its current low ebb. The confusing answer so far is that they reflect a mix, and the fate of President Trump's Gulf War depends on how the different elements work out. Iran went into the war with two goals. First, it hoped to spread enough devastation in the region to separate its neighbors from Washington and block Middle Eastern oil from world markets. As stock markets swooned and allies defected, Iran hoped that the pressure would force Mr. Trump to back down. So far, it isn't working. The missile and drone attacks on countries ranging from Cyprus and Turkey to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates have broadened the American-led coalition. The number of Iranian missiles launched every day is declining, and Iran's rapidly sinking navy is losing the ability to interfere with oil traffic. Iran's other goal is to force the U.S. to choose between allowing the regime to survive and waging a deeply unpopular and expensive ground war to overthrow it. The mullahs believe that Mr. Trump will punt before he commits to a ground war, and that even if he does invade, the Americans will ultimately be defeated in Iran as they were in Afghanistan. The Americans and Israelis so far seem to be trying three different approaches to frustrate the mullahs' survival strategy. First, thanks to precision weapons and deep intelligence penetration, they are doing their best to destroy the organizations, weapons, and facilities that the regime loyalists need to crush their domestic opponents. Second, they are encouraging ethnic minorities, Kurds in the north, Baluch communities in the east, conceivably Azeris should the war drag on, to rise against Tehran. Armed support from Azerbaijan and Iraqi Kurdistan could make the challenge more formidable. The idea is that threats to Iranian unity might compel the regime's surviving leaders to come to satisfactory terms before the whole country dissolves. Third, the Allies seek to split the leadership and to identify Iranian equivalents of Delcy Rodriguez, willing to work with the Americans rather than against them. These plans all have drawbacks. Attacks widespread enough to weaken Iranian security forces will inevitably hit civilian targets and infrastructure, potentially strengthening domestic support for the government. Supporting minority rebellions could backfire badly among ethnic Persians and others who don't want to see their country break into a collection of warring mini-states. And it's far from clear that an Iranian Delcy Rodriguez would live long enough to implement any deal agreed with Mr. Trump. As recently as October 2023, it looked as if Iran could do nothing wrong, as it systematically laid the foundations for a new Persian empire in the modern Middle East. Since that time, almost everything the mullahs have tried ended in disaster. Now they stand with their backs against the wall. The next few weeks will likely decide Iran's future. Let us hope the mullahs choose a path that leads to peace. Letter to the editor, How to Protect Ukraine and the Middle East. Your editorial, Ukraine is Iran's drone training range, highlighting the deadly new threat of the Moscow-Tehran access to U.S. service members, is a welcome wake-up call. You did a public service by reminding President Trump that America has a vital security stake in Ukraine's survival as part of the coalition fighting the Moscow-Tehran axis. When asked to help the U.S. prosecute the president's unilateral war of choice in Iran, now engulfing the entire Middle East, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky responded immediately that he would help the U.S. counter Russian Iranian drones, given Ukraine's deep expertise defending against Russia's illegal aggression in Europe. President Trump could solidify the vital security stake in Ukraine's survival by issuing a legal executive order to seize all immobilized Russian sovereign assets within U.S. jurisdiction and transfer them to Ukraine to be used to buy U.S.-made or sourced military weapons to defend its country and citizens from war criminal Vladimir Putin's nightly terror campaign. A minimum of $5 billion and likely much more, according to expert estimates, could be made available in a matter of days by the president's order. To seal the deal, Mr. Trump should tell House Speaker Mike Johnson to put the Peace Act on the House floor for a vote. That bill passed the House Financial Services Committee by a vote of 53-1, and it contains an amendment to current law to permit Ukraine to use transferred Russian funds to buy defense articles. The president needs to act now to not only help Ukraine at no cost to U.S. taxpayers, but also to protect U.S. troops and civilians in the new war zone he created in the Middle East. From Greg Wilson, Estero, Florida. Mr. Wilson was a Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Treasury Department, 1986 to 89. The Pepper and Salt cartoon shows a flight attendant going down the aisle of a plane offering refreshments to the customers. She says, stimulant or depressant. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the March 10th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day or evening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios.